This is Why So Mysterious, the podcast where we attempt to fill the gap between the bodies we have and the lack of knowledge around them.
We're sharing our experiences and answering our own questions,
with some help along the way,
to destigmatize tricky, taboo topics.
The triple T's.
Hello. Welcome back to another episode of Why So Mysterious. I'm Raven.
And I'm Sara.
And today we're going to be talking about, we're going there, toxic shock syndrome. And if you'll allow me to editorialize for a moment.
Please.
Sonia, cue thunderstorm. Maybe, if you want.
I like that.
Could be fun. Okay,
Love
so...
All right. Shall we get started?
Sarah's pretty depressed already.
I'm really, really depressed.
Uh-huh.
I did the research side of this one.
So yeah, maybe we should just say little frame here. Sara today is going to be going through what even is toxic shock, because there's a lot of like misinformation about it and stuff. What does it affect? All that
How do you get it?
stuff, and then I'm gonna take you to story time. We're gonna go back to the 70s.
Story time.
So maybe we'll end on a good note. We'll see.
Yeah.
But yours is kind of all current, so maybe it's not really a good note.
I don't know. Mine's like kind of current. Some of it's like, I don't know.
All over the
backdated.
place.
It's all over the place.
All right, let's get into it.
Let's get into it. So kind of just doing the general Google search of TSS, you get a lot of the same things. It is just a bacterial infection that causes shock. Basically, it causes your body to go into a toxic shock.
Yes.
So I'm going to give like just the very...
Do
like,
it. A lot of people I don't think
yeah.
really know what it is. They've heard the
Tons of
term, but they
people.
don't actually know.
For those of you who don't know what toxic shock syndrome is, it is basically a staph infection that reaches your bloodstream. So staph, I have like the staphylococcus? Staphylococcus? Secaucus. I don't know. We're just going to call it staph.
Aureus, right? That's the second word?
Yeah.
Which is...
Staph, which we're going to be talking about in... there are actually two types of toxic shock syndrome.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There is staph version, and then there is strep related toxic shock. And they usually call it toxic shock-like syndrome. But
That's
it basically...
the strep one?
Yeah, it basically presents itself the same, and it is treated pretty much the same, but it does not come from menstrual product.
Right, because we should say, like, toxic shock, you can acquire toxic shock other ways besides the ways we're going to talk about, but it is quite rare.
Yeah.
I think I told you the statistic once that it's more likely you'll get dysentery in the West than you will get toxic shock by anything non-menstrual related.
What is dysentery?
Dysentery is when you die by shitting too much.
Yeah.
It's just like you can't stop.
I'm sorry, that is basically TSS. You shit yourself profusely.
Really? Oh God.
Profusely.
I mean, dysentery is from being like poisoned too, so it's basically the same thing. Yeah, they both suck.
They all suck. But so today we're going to be talking about staph-related toxic shock syndrome because that is basically the most related to menstrual product use. You can get either staph version or strep version, like anybody can. But I would also like... So when I was doing a lot of this research, it was always like, it's most linked to tampon usage, but anybody can get it, men and children. And it literally said that everywhere. But I would also like to say, like, the one thing that I think bothered me the most was that men and children and other non-menstruating people, when they get it from, like, surgeries,
bad tattoos,
burns, bad tattoos. So there's like an infection source that they can see.
And it's also not
the most
usually
part.
like a source that is like a taboo to bring up.
Precisely. It's not something that you're already like, I mean, we live in a bubble where we're super comfortable talking about vaginas, but there's a huge ton of people that don't even talk to their doctors about things.
Even medical professionals too.
Yeah.
Like they won't even think to mention it sometimes.
Exactly.
It happens. Yeah.
So I think that's like the thing that irritated me the most when reading it was like everywhere it was like, which is true. Yes, males, children, other people can get it, but they have like an infection source that is usually like
You can pinpoint it quickly.
pinpoint it pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Versus if you get it through using a menstrual product that you are inserting in you, you're, and I'll get into how you can get it from doing that, but you're not necessarily seeing a source. You're not seeing an infection area. You're just feeling symptoms that are basically like hardcore flu symptoms.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's like, and so in all the articles that I read, it was like basically kind of being like, no, don't worry. Like, this is not a menstruating thing. This is, everybody can get it, which I'm like, yeah, everybody can. But the people that are getting it in relation to menstruation, they don't see the source as easily.
Yeah.
And if they don't know it's coming from their tampon, which a ton of people do not know, then I just feel like more likely they're gonna disregard the symptoms for what they are, and they're just like, oh well, I just have like a fever.
You
chills.
like hardcore have your concerned face on right now.
I know. I'm like, it just makes me so freaking, I'm like, doing all this research just like seriously brought me down today. I was like, this is something that I wish I could just eliminate completely. Literally only one article I read said that a way to eliminate the risk of TSS is to stop using tampons. Every other article said, don't worry, you can still use tampons, just follow these guidelines, which I will go over. But another really great option is to stop fucking using tampons.
Yeah. It's not like anything else that you put inside your body. And I mean, I shouldn't say anything else, but it's not like a pacemaker. It's not like anything like that where it's just like, the risks are worth the reward.
Well, yeah, exactly.
When
I'm like,
there are other
we do
options.
risky things all the time.
Yeah.
But for the most part, when you do something risky, you know the risks for the most part. You're at least fairly aware that you're making a decision that's like, oh, like, smoking. Everybody knows smoking is bad, But you choose to do whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm like, with tampons, you're choosing something that's like, it's a hygiene product. Like, it's not something that you're like, oh, I'm going to buy this and this could potentially lead to my death. So I think that's where I get really upset about it.
Yeah.
But okay, I'm going to give you just kind of like the general.
Yeah, give me the rundown.
So, like I said, we're going to be talking about the staph version, and it's basically when the staph infection hits your bloodstream. So, also the statistics on how many people get tampon-related TSS is extremely all over the place.
Yeah.
I found everywhere from 1 in 100,000 to 17 in 100,000, which is a pretty big difference. Sorry, I'm like, I'm so, there were so many things that I read that upset me or saw that upset me. And like all the kind of like campaigns around it, especially with like period or like tampon companies, were like, you're more likely to be struck by lightning.
A soda machine will fall on you.
Yeah, like all these things than dying from TSS. But, and yes, there's only a 5% chance of dying once you've been diagnosed with TSS. But
There are also a
there
lot
are
of dangers.
so many long-term
Yeah,
effects
exactly.
of having had TSS. Your risk of getting TSS like skyrockets.
Well, yeah, if
again.
you've had TSS, you can no longer use tampons.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%. And I just think like with the numbers that they're at, like, and the even just like some of the cases that I found, like sometimes they don't know why someone has, whatever it is, toxic shock, or sometimes they don't even diagnose it as toxic shock until much later. So I just don't always trust all the numbers.
Yeah.
So
That's your
That's me.
asterisk on your rundown?
I just don't trust all the numbers. I'm very skeptical of these numbers. I think that it is higher than reported, because then I also saw some places saying that they aren't monitoring, like they're not, the CDC stopped tracking
Yeah.
TSS as a risky, like, so they basically stopped gathering data on it because it was so rare. Which I'm like, well, if you're not gathering the data, then you're not going to find out.
Yeah, you
how
can't really
many
say how
people.
rare it is if you're not gathering any data on it.
No.
And it still happens. So.
And it still happens. And I've said this so many times before. I think what I can't wrap my mind around is why I know so many people, well, not so many people, but I know like 4 people that have had diagnosed TSS.
But do you know 100,000 people?
No, precisely. So I'm like, I can't wrap my mind around how I personally would know so many people that have had TSS, but it be so rare, that it be so rare. And the people that are telling you that it is so rare are the companies selling the products that are causing it. So I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't believe it. Okay. But if you happen to be using tampons, the main symptoms, which can appear within 2 hours of inserting a tampon. Like,
Yeah, it doesn't matter how long you've been wearing this tampon.
This is not, this is not like, oh, wear it for 12, 16 hours and then you get, symptoms. This can literally happen within 2 hours of inserting your very first tampon.
Yeah.
So basically, it is like sudden fever. So you're talking about like, I think in Fahrenheit, it was like 102.
Yeah.
Or like, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, I've seen
Celsius.
102. No, because I think most people know your regular body temperature is 98.6 Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
anything over 100 is bad.
Is bad.
Yeah.
But that's like that's kind of like where it goes to that very suddenly. It doesn't take long. Low blood pressure, so your heart slows down, it's beating slower. Headache and muscle aches were kind of like one of the common ones, but I think that one's like really hard to really say. I mean, you can have a headache and muscle aches from so many things.
You can also just have it from your period. In general.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
Yeah.
So what I would kind of like say is more important is sudden fever, low blood pressure, diarrhea, nausea, and vomiting. Those are like the 3. I watched a ton of videos of people who have had TSS. Vomiting and diarrhea were like consistent on all of them.
So it is like dysentery. What about, I'm sure you're going to get to it, but the sunburn looking.
Yes. And then the rash.
Yeah.
The sunburn looking rash.
Yeah.
That is also really common. That some people are getting that like day 2, day 3. Like it's not necessarily as the fast acting is like fever. You wouldn't necessarily notice your own blood pressure. Like you might notice you're like lethargic.
For sure.
But the diarrhea and the vomiting, like literally so many people that I watched, they immediately basically started vomiting and having like really bad diarrhea. And basically like a fatigue, like so weak that they couldn't get to the bathroom themselves. Like 4 of the people that I watched, these are just like regular people that are just like uploading on YouTube. They had to be like carried by their family to the bathroom. Yeah.
That's
so I'm like,
horrible.
it's like a complete depletion of energy. You can't walk by yourself. Thankfully, all the people that I watched usually were like living with someone, or someone was like if you can't get to the bathroom by yourself, like there is something wrong. Like, sure, everybody's had that, like you've been sick where you feel really, really weak and you don't want to get up to go to the bathroom.
Sure.
But
Or you're really hungover.
you're really hungover, you got a log roll there. But no, like if you actually can't physically get up,
Yeah.
then there's something wrong. Like your body.
You should go to the hospital
You should go
because
to the
at the very
hospital.
least you need to be rehydrated probably.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
yeah.
So, those are kind of, and then, you know, redness of the eyes, mouth and throat, and seizure. Like, I think you'd
Sorry,
hopefully be
you just-
going to the hospital if you're seizing.
I thought you were just going to blow by a seizure. Like, seizure.
Seizure, whatever. That one I'm kind of like, you should be seeking medical attention if you're having seizures.
Call an ambulance.
Call an ambulance.
Yeah.
The thing that I think most concerns me about these symptoms is in a lot of the cases that I read, they were dismissed by medical professionals right off the bat, unless there was a like rare disease specialist around,
Right.
or an OBGYN. Most people got misdiagnosed with scarlet fever, which has symptoms of, hold on, I wrote it down, sore throat, rash, and fever.
So similar.
Similar.
Right.
Or they got misdiagnosed with a pretty bad UTI. So
That's, I've heard that one before.
because UTI is fever, nausea, vomiting. So that is not your UTI where you're peeing all the time. That is your UTI when it's actually in your upper tract where it's like reached your bladder.
That's when you're having the low back pain and stuff.
Exactly. Low back pain, and it's potentially affecting your kidneys at that point. So UTIs are also very important to get treated.
100%.
Don't let them go untreated, because a UTI in your lower tract can turn into a UTI in your upper tract, and that affects your kidneys. And if anybody doesn't know what a UTI is, it's a urinary tract infection.
And I hope you never have to know what a UTI feels
They're
like.
so terrible. Hoy, I've had a few in my day. And just, you know, for listeners out there, go pee after sex. To help prevent UTIs. That was like, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
When I was like younger, when I was like 20, and I literally got like UTIs way too often.
I can't remember who told me that,
what?
but I found out before I started having sex. And then when I
Really?
started having sex, I was so paranoid about it. I was just like, bam, out of bed. Like, I'm going to the bathroom.
That's me now. I'm like literally out of bed, go to the
It's not
bathroom.
worth it. I'm not cuddling. I need to pee.
Never. But yeah, seriously, it helps. Okay, so now to kind of go into the reason for infection. So this can be for any staph infection. It's just if you have an open wound.
Yeah.
And staph bacteria can be anywhere. Staph bacteria isn't...
It can also already be in you.
Yeah, it can already... It's usually like on your skin, in your like in your mouth. It's like... It's a harmful bacteria, but if it doesn't touch your bloodstream, it's not that scary. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, you know, it's a bacteria, but it's when it hits your bloodstream that it really can fuck things up. And then, like I said, with staph, that's how anybody with an open wound, bad tattoo, surgery, like all those things, basically, like that's how you can get staph through those open wounds. But with the use of tampons, basically there's like two theories. It's either the tampon, somehow maybe on your finger, you touch a tampon, the tampon goes in, or the applicator, you touch the applicator goes in and carries the staph bacteria into your vaginal wall. It then gets carried into your uterus, which has an open source to your bloodstream, I guess.
Well, if I may, the other one that I have, which also that I've come across that seems the most kind of common to me,
Yeah.
at least it just seems like something that definitely has a very easy way of happening, is like we both know how sensitive the tissue in the vaginal wall
yeah,
is.
that's the-
And it gets even more sensitive when you're menstruating.
Yeah.
It's very easy to create a lesion
Yes,
inside your
exactly.
vagina. And if the presence of that bacteria has the opportunity to come in contact with that lesion, it's very
Yeah.
easy for it to then enter the bloodstream.
Yeah.
And even though a tampon is, you know, quote unquote meant to be in your vagina and they are tested and they are quote unquote safe, they can still, depending on how dry your vagina is,
Yeah.
or like anything like that, depending on if you have any medical conditions or
Yeah.
anything, it's possible that the tampon can cause the lesion. It's
Yeah.
possible the applicator can cause the lesion. It's
Yeah.
possible your fingers can cause the lesion.
Yeah.
And then also when you're pulling it out, which is why they say that you
Yeah.
need the lowest absorbency of tampon, because if the tampon has made your vagina dry, that like really ups
Yeah.
the ante on
Yeah.
whether or not you can create a lesion is when you pull it out.
Exactly. And they do say that you're most likely to create these micro cuts, basically,
Yeah.
with rayon based tampons. It is still possible with the cotton. So, like, you know, like 100% cotton tampons, they're not TSS risk free. They are just way less risky. But I would say like 97% of the tampons on the market and being used are not the organic ones. Like most people are buying like the big name brand
Yeah.
tampons.
Yeah.
And those are the ones using rayon. Pretty much all of them. Unless you're buying like Natracare. That's like
Yeah, there's a few now
there's a
that
few-
have
there are
like
a few,
organic, but also like
but-
yeah, just like tampons in general. It doesn't like, you know, there's more. It's possible more with rayon, but it's
Yeah.
also like it's not always the makeup of the tampon that causes
and
the
they
lesion.
they also say like the likely it's the lesions, but there is some thought that it can travel into the uterus, and through the uterus it gets into the bloodstream. So regardless of your type of tampon at that point, you would still be
Yes.
open
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyway, so that's kind of like the reason for infection. That's when you have, so the statistic I gave earlier, like the 4 to 17 in 100,000,
Yeah.
that is just of the staph infections related to tampons, like known to be related to tampons.
Yeah, properly diagnosed.
Properly
and
diagnosed.
treated.
There are, you know, lots of people get staph infection and then
yeah.
TSS. But basically, other times that you can get TSS, you can also get TSS through childbirth because you basically are opening up a lot of wounds.
Oh, you're opening.
You're
all right.
opening, yep. The use of, which I didn't know this, the use of a diaphragm and a vaginal sponge are just as likely.
Oh, we're gonna talk about the
Oh,
sponge,
really? Okay.
Sarah. You thought you were
Woo!
safe from the sponge.
Oh my
No.
god. Okay, well, yeah, that's a definite risk of TSS there. Open wounds, burns, and surgeries. Those are like, you know, the times. Okay, so basically, say you have like the fever, nausea, whatever. You're actually realizing you have TSS. You hopefully get medical help. Basically, the first thing when they diagnose you, you know, with toxic shock, depending on at what stage you are, basically your body goes into shock first because your organs don't receive the proper blood levels.
Okay.
So basically, I guess like, you know, everything needs a good flow of blood.
Well, circulation's very important.
Very important. So basically, they just start stock building toxic waste in your body. So they can't get rid
Because of the lack of movement.
because of the lack of movement. Look, and that's what I talked about, the low blood pressure. So basically, that's what shock is. Your body is just like not getting rid of the bad, I guess, like staph infection.
you become septic.
You become septic, yeah. Then Because of that and the low blood pressure and septic and whatever, you go into renal failure, which is when your organs start to fail. So your kidneys, your livers, those are like the first two to go basically with TSS.
Those are the filters.
Those are the filters, exactly. And then sadly, death is like the next step. So pretty much, depending on when and if you get to the hospital, because you are supposed to go to the hospital as soon as you think you have TSS.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, just based off of what I was reading, is don't listen to the medical professionals when they say that they don't think you have it. Like, one of the girls that I was listening to, she literally still had the tampon inside her, and they didn't, because another big risk is confusion, is like, obviously with fever, like, which is kind of just standard. If you have a really high fever, you're kind of delirious. You don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Your time frame is totally off.
You don't know what's real sometimes.
A lot of the people have just forgotten it. Like, started getting sick within the good amount of time frame of wearing a tampon, but then have left it in because they started getting sick. And one of the girls, she was in the hospital for like 2 days, and they couldn't figure out. They had it wasn't until a rare disease specialist came in and was like, and she was saying maybe it's TSS. Like, I think her mom was, like Googling the symptoms, and they're like, no, it's not that. It's not that. And then they literally brought in an OBGYN, gave her a pap smear, and the tampon was still there. Yeah. So and the mom was like, we think it's this. Like, she's showing these symptoms. Can you please, because they can test your blood for TSS. It's not like just like an assumed diagnosis. There is a test. So, I mean, I'm sure it costs or whatever, but whatever. Anyways. So if you have any of the symptoms, go to the hospital right away.
Yeah.
Seek medical help, because the thing is, time is such a sensitive thing when it comes to this.
It happens fast.
Because it happens so fast. And one of the cases that I was reading, they called an ambulance because she was like crawling to the bathroom, like she couldn't get up. What I was talking about, vomiting, diarrhea, and the ambulance showed up, and they're like, "Oh, like she probably just has like scarlet fever or whatever." Which I think the clinic she'd been at earlier that day had said she had scarlet fever, but she wasn't reacting to any of the medicine that they'd given her. It had been like 8 hours. And thankfully her mom was there with her. And her mom was like, no, like, she's getting worse. She's not getting any better. And so basically, even though the paramedics were like, no, like, you should just sleep on it. Like, you should just sleep, take the medicine, you'll be fine. The mom was just like, no, absolutely not. She needs to go to the hospital. Literally the next day they find out, had she stayed home, she would have been dead within 4 hours. So I'm like, time is such an important thing. So even if you think you're overreacting, just overreact. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, fuck it.
Fuck it. Like, just overreact, and then you'll just have overreacted rather than not reacting and it ending really badly. But once you do get to the hospital and say you do have TSS, basically you go on IV antibiotics. Hopefully they can then get rid of all of the staph infection. On the rare cases that they've caught it too late, they basically, like, you end up getting often like gangrene in your limbs. There's some pretty famous cases of people getting limbs amputated. Most like notable is Lauren, I think her last name's Wasser.
I think you're right.
Yeah, she was a model in New York.
She's still a model, actually.
She is still a model. Her case is crazy. She her mom had called the cops because she'd basically like gone home from a party, was feeling really sick, went to bed, didn't wake up for like 13 hours or something. Her mom, who was like bedridden from some surgery, like an hour away, couldn't get a hold of her, called the cops to do a welfare check. Cops came and they could tell she was really, really sick. But she was just like, I just have a fever. She was kind of delirious. They just left. Yeah. The next day, nobody could get a hold of her. The next day, her mom got someone to drive her out there, and they had to get the police to like knock down her door. And she was like passed out, like face on the ground in her bedroom. And at that point, she was very septic, I guess.
Yeah.
And she ended up having first her like left leg or right leg amputated. And they were able to keep her other leg.
But then it was like
then,
4 years later.
Yeah, she actually chose to get her other leg amputated because
didn't she lose toes on the other
she lost
foot?
toes and had really bad ankle damage or something like, or heel from like gangrene.
Yeah.
And it just caused her like basically she had like chronic pain.
Ugh.
So she ended up getting it amputated and sued. I don't know if she won that lawsuit, but sued the tampon company.
You know what? Can I just say something about this story really quick? Because like you, I was watching like, YouTube videos and stuff of people who'd had TSS. And I watched several interviews with her.
Yeah.
Short ones, like Good Morning America and stuff like that. Not once did anyone mention tampons. No one asked her how she got toxic shock. And so I didn't bring it up at all because I was like, did she get it from a tampon?
No, I found one because the thing, she is actually super anti-tampon. Like she is.
I couldn't find any information about that.
Because I think, I don't know, this might be conspiracy theory. I think that the tampon companies that are behind these tampons, they are massive, massive companies.
Oh, yeah.
Like huge.
Yeah.
And owned by even huger, bigger companies.
Oh, yeah.
So
one of them just made a vaccine for COVID. So
precisely. Thank you. I'm pretty sure that's one. No, that's not
you're
the one I
thinking
got.
of a different one, but there's another one that is.
Yes,
I don't know if they make menstrual products, but they're a hygiene company. You all know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, you guys know. You can literally just Google. We're not gonna say it because it'll just get this shut down or something.
The point is they have a lot of money and a lot of resources.
A lot, and the thing is, a lot of people don't want to mess with them. Like you don't want to put it out there and be like. Hence why we don't want to put it out there. What brands? Because it's just like it's just we can't. Like you can't go there because they're so big. But I found an interview where she was very blatant. She was like, a tampon caused this, and literally changed my life forever.
Oh yeah,
forever. And I think that's what. Like doing the research, I watched so many stories of people literally where their lives are changed forever by a tampon, which I think is just so devastating. And the fact is, the average age is between 15 and 25.
Yeah.
Which you were saying it's because you build up immunity.
You do. You build up immunity. So you can actually build up immunity to this particular kind of staph infection. But it's based on, I think it's just straight up based on being like putting things inside you and having your body live with it for like a while.
Yeah.
Because when you're younger, your immune system isn't ready to fight that thing, or it hasn't come in contact with it yet. And so, the rates of death or like serious I don't know,
TSS,
like serious amputation situations.
Yeah.
They're young menstruators.
Yeah.
They're very young.
Devastating. And I think that's why I was like so upset doing this research, because I could find basically at least one, if not more. This was me not even looking for it, but one 15 to 16-year-old that died every year from tampons, like known from tampons.
Yeah.
And that's in specifically like Canada and the US. But like in 2002, 8 died.
Right.
You know, like there are times where it's just like, and there was a period of time where, I guess like, you know, I know you're going to talk about the scandal, but where the scandal was kind of like a decade ago. So they started increasing the high absorbency of tampons again, which I didn't even talk about that. So basically, the risk factor is just, I would say tampons in general. There is a risk factor of how long you keep it in. But like I said, it can also just happen if you have it in for 2 hours. It's not really that time sensitive. But it is most commonly found in super absorbent tampons.
Yes.
So tampons.
Because it dries out.
It
The area.
also holds a lot of blood, and blood is an amazing breeding ground for staph.
Yeah.
Bacteria. Like it's, I don't know, just the right texture, the right temperature.
Well, and it's also,
everything.
you know, menses is not just blood. It's also like mucus.
Mucus. And yeah, exactly. So those are most commonly.
They're a perfect petri dish.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, it's like super tampons. I would say time isn't really like, you know, I personally think you just shouldn't use them. But
yeah. But like you said, it can happen within 2 hours.
It can happen within 2 hours. And pretty much like from the research that I was doing, the cases that I was reading about, none of them had left it in for too long. Some of them had accidentally left it in because they got so sick.
Right.
That they lost track of time and stuff like that, but they were getting sick before that window like of expiration or whatever. So, and quite a few of them were super tampons, but it can still also happen with a regular tampon.
Yeah, if you create that lesion, it doesn't matter what size it is. So there's too many variables, too many alarming variables.
Yeah. Just devastating. I'm so depressed after doing this research. Like, there's just so many cases of young menstruating people that have died or have had like serious trauma. Like, because that's a lot of trauma to go through. Just, you know, like be in the ICU for X
rehabilitation as well.
Rehabilitation, you know, like all these things, whether you lose a limb or not, like that's trauma. That's going to be something that like sticks with you.
Yeah, your body is poisoned.
Literally.
Yeah. It's
terrifying. But please lighten the mood. Please tell us.
Sorry you had to go through all that.
No.
We're going to go back in time.
Okay.
And we're going to talk today about toxic shock scare of the Rely tampon.
Yeah.
So, my source for this was Rely and Toxic Shock Syndrome, a Technological Health Crisis by Sara L. Vostrel, PhD.
Okay.
It was published in the Yale Journal of Biology and Medicine. I read. You wrote the article. I wrote a Yale article today, actually over a couple days, but it was really good. Okay, so by the mid 1970s, a lot of menstruators were using tampons. It was nobody wanted to wear the belt anymore. Maxi pads were like pretty huge still. Also, pants were very tight in the 70s.
They were
very tight. So tampons were just like becoming a really regular thing. The stigma was like, you know, still there, but they just didn't talk about it. And so, you know, convenient, all that good stuff.
Totally.
I read a statistic that was like by the mid 70s, it was like 70% of North Americans were using them. Wow. So, of course, Procter and Gamble wanted a piece of that sweet, sweet tampon money.
Of course they did.
Yes. So, and of course they have a lot of money to do whatever they want. But because there were so many tampons on the market in the 70s and so many people were using them, they were like, we need an edge.
Oh,
what's our edge going to be? We need something so unique. And this was during something that I read about called the absorbency wars.
Whoa.
Yeah. So
okay.
Obviously, like there were, you know, Tampax was a thing, Kotex was a thing. All the regular brands that you already know about for the most part, I would say, were already on the market.
There. Yeah.
And so they all had basically comparable attributes to their product. So it was really hard for them to like find a unique spin. So they just started constantly trying to outdo each other on absorbency because, like, what's the number one thing people don't want is leaks.
Yep.
So Procter & Gamble created this tampon called the Rely tampon, and they started testing it in 1975. It was named Rely because it was so reliable.
Of course.
And they made the tagline that it even absorbs the worry.
Rely's worth finding out about. After all, it's really a better tampon. Remember, they named it Rely.
And they were not fucking around. This tampon was so absorbent.
Really?
Oh, it was so absorbent. So, and the way that they did that was, they went in guns ablazing. This is what we're going to do. So this was also, I should say too, up until then, most companies, tampons had already been around for like a couple decades at that point, even though not everyone was using them. They were mostly made out of cotton. And then to cut costs over time, companies were dabbling more and more in synthetics. So that was rayon, and then also varying kinds of polys. So polyester and polycarbon, weird shit like that. So
something you really just don't want in there.
well, Rely decides,
Yeah.
because they need to make these tampons so freaking absorbent to compete in the marketplace, they're not going to do cotton. They're not even going to do rayon. They're going to make tampons made out of polyester foam cubes and chips
What?
of carboxymethyl cellulose.
I don't know what that is, but that sounds nasty.
Carboxymethyl cellulose is a food thickener. It's an
What?
Yes, it is a non-organic agent added into things like puddings and ice creams to make them thick. And the reason it's used, and this is like, peak 70s, we're eating a lot of plastic in the 70s.
We're eating a lot of plastic.
Yeah, we are.
Seriously?
Oh, yeah. We
Hold on.
definitely
How
are.
is it a non-organic thickener? What do you
Yes.
mean? So they were putting synthetic thickener in food?
It's like, oh, yeah, and this is still a totally normal thing. It's just like there's carnauba wax in candy. You polish your car with carnauba wax, but you can also polish a Skittle with it, too.
What?
Did you not know this?
No.
There's a lot of things that are technically edible that you wouldn't knowingly eat out there in the world.
Right.
So the reason that it's
Gross.
considered food safe, even though it's a non-organic. And
Okay.
again, we eat a lot of things that are non-organic
Okay.
things, because it won't decompose in your body. It'll go in and come
go
out
out?
the same way.
What?
So it's literally just to thicken the food. It has no flavor, no nothing. But
Can't we use like cornstarch for that instead?
there's probably cornstarch in there already. They need a little special sauce of
my gosh.
carboxy in there.
Carboxy.
So it was these cubes, and it was this.
Were they actually cube shaped?
Yeah, but they're like micro. They're really small.
Oh,
like you
okay,
can't. It's
okay.
not like a bean bag.
I was just imagining like a cube.
And so all of this was wrapped up in like a polyester tea bag looking thing. So they don't
Gross.
look any different from a regular tampon. You can Google image them. They're super, normal looking.
Okay.
But when you cut them in half and you put them under a microscope, it's a little weird. Also, it was. Oh, hang on one sec. Okay, yeah. So another way that Rely was a very unique tampon is that not only did they expand lengthwise, which is how classic tampons expand in the vagina, they also expanded widthwise. So they expanded on all fronts.
I thought tampons. Now I'm just assuming. I thought tampons always expanded widthwise.
I think that they do, but maybe it's just like a little bit.
A little bit.
This was literally designed to
just take up all the space.
it's to stop what's called bypass, which is when the blood gets by, obviously.
Wow.
Which is like how you get a leak. And what is this Rely tampon promising you it won't do? It won't give you a leak. So it's basically
It's just like-
expanding top to bottom and turning into a plug in the vagina.
wow.
Yes. And then it also, when confronted with liquid, the top opens like a flower and it turns into a cup so it can hold
What?
even more blood. Yeah. So
Whoa,
this thing was like,
insane.
they were insane. and no one had seen anything like it.
I mean, I will say they sound pretty
Effective?
innovative.
Oh, 100%.
Like,
Yeah.
I wish it wasn't what you're going to tell me it was.
Well,
'cause I know it's bad,
the
but
thing
it
is,
sounds kind of cool.
At the time, nobody knew what toxic shock was. And
No.
there was also a belief in the scientific community and the medical community that anything you put inside the body that is not poisonous on its own has a casual relationship with the body.
Yeah.
So it's not going to really react negatively because it's not, unless it was already bad to begin with.
Yeah,
When
exactly.
in theory, everything that they know about tampons, and again, they've been out there for like 2 decades.
Yeah.
There's nothing really telling these people that anything about this is bad.
Yeah.
So to be fair, but that's bullshit. And here's another reason that these tampons made it to market when they maybe shouldn't have. In 1976, the FDA recategorized tampons as a medical device, whereas before they had been categorized as a cosmetic device.
Which is really weird.
Yes, it is. So that means that any new menstrual hygiene products like tampons going forward, we're going to be subject to way more strict regulations, testing, and they would also need pre-approval by the FDA before they go to market. Now, because Rely started testing in 1974, so 2 years before this all started, they were grandfathered in. So they were still allowed to continue testing under the guise of being a cosmetic device, and they did not need pre-approval from the FDA.
Of course.
So, they were allowed to just go ahead and use
I'm
the
sure
data that they'd already...
fucking regretted that so hardcore.
I don't know. They actually didn't lose that much money at the end of this whole thing, so there's that. But, okay, so in August of 1978, Rely was officially released, and sales were very high pretty much immediately, in part because they did very aggressive marketing, which included mailing tampons to people in packs of 4. And that campaign was very successful.
Yeah, I bet.
And because of all the promises of leak-free, there were a lot of stories of menstruators actually like holding on to these free tampons to use for like a quote-unquote special occasion because of how high the absorbency was. So that also, though, kind of worked against them in a few cases. Obviously, in the grand scheme of things, it really worked against them. But some menstruators stopped using them because how absorbent the tampons were just freaked them out.
Oh,
so
good.
one story
Thank
that I
God.
read, never thought in a million years that we would get a cameo from the band Styx in one of these episodes. Do you know who Styx is, right?
No.
You don't? I'm sailing away. That was really embarrassing, but you don't know that one? They're like the poor man's Queen. They're like,
Oh, I just like Queen.
you should. Don't. Styx is really funny.
Really? Okay.
There's an episode of that 70s
to
show where Eric
Google it.
lines up to buy tickets to Styx and nobody can understand it. They're all like, Styx fucking sucks. But they're really funny.
Okay.
The singer has like a very nasally voice.
It
and
sounded like it. You're
cut that
rendition.
out.
No.
Show me singing that. I tried to make it more nasally, but it didn't work. Okay.
Love
Yeah, Styx making a cameo in the old Rely story. So one woman had a story of wearing her Rely tampon through an evening at a Styx concert. She was one of those people who stashed a mailed-in Rely and waited, and this was because the concert was an hour away, and it was like 1980. So bathroom access was not going to be great at the concert, so she wore this Rely tampon all night.
Oh my gosh.
Page shuffle. When she got home, and I quote, I removed the tampon after getting home late at night and wondered if I hadn't lost my virginity. That thing was so huge. I stopped using them after that because of being too grossed out.
Oh my God.
So I don't know how big this thing got. She didn't go into details, but in my mind, it's like the size of like a rabbit vibrator. Like it's a decent size.
I can imagine. It's probably pretty big. If it's packing that big of a punch, it is gonna expand.
Oh man, yeah, width and lengthways. So
Wow.
Pretty gnarly. Okay, so also, obviously, we now know that is really, really bad. If you're pulling
Extremely.
a tampon out at the end of an evening and it's so big it scares you,
Oh,
that's not big. So the very thing
jeez.
that gave Rely its marketing edge
Actually made
would
it, like,
also be their downfall.
yeah. I'm glad that people were alarmed by that.
Somebody was.
Yeah.
I'm sure a few people were, but it's
Yeah.
like, this tampon must have been like,
I'm sure also because purity culture was still pretty intense.
definitely.
Big,
But the people baking that into you probably weren't watching you take your tampon out.
No, but like think about like if that's her reaction,
Yeah.
like that she's like, oh my God, I basically lost my virginity. Like we all know that you're not a virgin if you use tampons,
No. But that's still extremely
But
alarming.
yes, it's so disturbing.
Pretty intense.
Yeah.
Okay, so that same engineer that I talked about at the beginning who was referenced the absorbency wars.
Right.
So this person worked in the hygiene industry. They were nameless in the article that I read.
Okay.
And they observed an overall inadequate understanding of both menstrual fluid and the functional anatomy of the vagina in the industry.
Are we surprised
No.
at all?
But it still really broke my heart when I read that in the article. I was just like, well, at least somebody said something, I guess.
Hopefully.
So, independent scientists and those employed by the menstrual hygiene brands struggled to have a control in their studies, experiments, all this stuff. Because, again, as we both know, the vagina has moods, it has seasons,
It has hormones.
it changes all the time. The microflora in the vagina changes all the time. It depends on the person. It depends on
Right.
the cycle, the diet, everything.
Yeah.
So they had a really hard time having a constant vagina to get all of this testing done
Right.
adequately. And I'm sure that's probably still an issue.
Yeah. Okay.
So some of the scientists also stated in internal memos within their communities and also their respective companies that improved understanding of the vagina itself would significantly reduce the need for trial by error testing of hygiene products. So basically what they were
Wow,
doing up
big
until
fucking
then,
surprise.
yeah, it was just like, we'll just test it until something goes wrong and then we'll try to like change it instead of actually like understanding the thing it's being used for and making a product for that. We'll make
Wow.
a product and do all this testing and then if something goes wrong then we'll figure it out
They're
from
just
there.
like rolling the dice.
Literally, it's just like, we don't know anything about the vag. You just
my
plug it up,
gosh.
right? It's
Yeah.
just a bunch of old dudes smoking
you
in a
know
room.
It. Yeah, you know it.
Okay.
Oy.
So, at the same time, now our hero enters the story. I promised you a hero. At the same time that P&G was doing all the testing for this Rely tampon, there was a study being done across several states of toxic shock syndrome in children. And it was helmed by Dr. Jeffrey Davis, who was from Wisconsin.
Okay.
But when this was going on, almost no one had heard of toxic shock. It was very rare still, and this was just a coincidence that it was happening at the same time. But it wasn't being done on menstruators; it was being done on children.
Yeah.
There had been no link to tampons and toxic
Okay.
shock
Yeah.
at that point. So there were two unknown variables that were about to be identified. But obviously that's challenging, and that is the role of synthetic tampons and the labeling of a new disease. So that's a pretty tall order,
Yeah.
for sure. So now we're going to get into what exactly was problematic about the Rely tampon. Obviously, the food grade things and whatnot.
There are multiple things wrong.
You
with
don't
it.
really, I feel like I don't even really need to explain. You can just assume, but I'm going to explain anyway.
it.
So the very first thing is that this tampon could hold up to 20 times its own weight in liquid. That's how absorbent this freaking
I
thing
wonder
was.
what did it ever say what the milliliters was?
No, it just said 20 times its own weight, so we could find out how much it weighed.
How much it
and then-
weighed? Wow,
I don't know, but that's like
that's scary.
as big as a penis, apparently.
Oh, terrifying.
So, it was an absolute sponge in you, and it sucked up all the moisture around you, which, like we just said, the drier your vagina and you have
more
something
likely.
in there,
Yeah.
when you pull it out, it's very easy to create a lesion
Very easy.
and for a staph infection to occur,
Yeah.
especially if that bacteria is already there. So the other issue is that that bacteria was almost always there with this tampon because of the composition.
Oh,
The
shit.
carboxymethylcellulose turns into a viscous jelly inside the tampon, and that creates a super highway for bacteria as the polyester cubes soak up the menses and the vaginal mucus,
Oh, no.
and then they just sit there and swim
What?
around. And then if you pull it out and you have a little bit of a lesion,
Yeah.
it's bad. It's bad, bad, bad,
Oh,
bad news.
Wow.
Yeah. It's really
That's
scary when you
terrifying.
think about it.
That's
yeah.
literally terrifying.
So this whole tampon was like created to be so absorbent, but they literally made like a super device
yeah,
to get you really sick.
it's like a death trap.
It is. It totally is. So in 1980, cases of toxic shock started really piling up.
Yeah.
And old Dr. Davis was working at a hospital in Madison, Wisconsin, and he
Okay.
had already published his paper and,
Yeah.
had all these findings. Then he started noticing that there were a lot of people who suddenly were coming in with toxic shock. Then he started noticing that they were all menstruators. And then he started noticing that they were all in a certain age range. And then he remembered that when he was in medical school, nobody really ever talked about the menstrual cycle.
Oh, big surprise.
So he started telling all these doctors and asking all these patients, are you on your period? When was your last menstrual
Yeah.
cycle? He started asking everyone. He started seeing the link between the period and the toxic shock. So he makes the link that most of these people, and by most I mean pretty much all of them, contracted the illness at the onset of their period, and that all of them had been using tampons. So he starts logging all this information, and then he mails a report. He types up a report because he's that kind of guy.
Yes.
And he mails it, because it's 1980,
Yeah.
to 3,500 colleagues across America.
Whoa.
And then all of a sudden his phone starts ringing like crazy because all these other medical professionals start seeing this crazy flu in these people, and they can't figure out what it is.
Oh my god.
They've never heard of TSS.
No.
So they're like, what is this? How do we treat it? They've seen people die.
I just literally got goosebumps.
Yeah. Can you imagine though? You don't know what this thing is,
That's
and you've been seeing it, and then
nuts.
all of a sudden this
This
paper lands on your desk.
Holy
Pretty,
shit.
it's pretty cool. So
Wow, he's a total badass.
I know. And then what's
love him.
also really cool is that the medical community starts working together to track and pinpoint the cause for the alarming spike in TSS they're seeing in all these hospitals across America. And they're all varying in severity from fever to death.
Yeah.
That's already happening.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'll say like the 5% death rate that I talked about now, that's not what it was back in 1980. Like all
No.
the stats that I'm giving, that's today.
That's
based
today,
off of
yeah.
today's
Yeah.
tampons. It was like insanely high. It was like 20% death rate
yeah.
back in 1980.
There was also just so much misinformation about tampons and how they could
So
be
much.
used because of the shame and stigma around them. It's like
Totally.
you couldn't talk about how to use these things safely and effectively
No.
because no one wanted to be impolite or improper, I guess.
Yeah, and it's that purity thing. Like nobody talks about it because it's,
Yeah.
it's taboo, it's dirty, it's
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. Which is probably could have saved everyone a lot of grief, but
Yeah.
whatever. We're learning.
We're learning.
Okay. So, because death
Yeah.
was on the table,
Yeah.
the link to tampon use was already abundantly clear to
Yeah.
these people who were researching things. So now it was important for them to find out if a specific tampon
Yeah.
was causing this, because the analogy that I saw was like, if there's a murder
Yeah.
and it's by gunshot, the forensic team is going to find out what kind of gun was used.
Right.
And I was like, aha, I see.
I know murder crime things.
And surprise, surprise, the brand that kept coming up over and over
Wow.
again was Rely.
Yeah.
In the 2 years Rely tampons had been on shelves, there had been a recorded 2,200 cases of TSS. 90% of those were associated with people who were menstruating at the time. And out of that 90%, 99% were using tampons.
Wow.
This is in 2 years.
Holy shit.
So all this starts making its way to the public, and then the CDC gets involved,
Good.
and then Procter and Gamble starts getting real nasty.
Oh, shit.
So
of course they did. Of
they felt like their product was being unfairly targeted.
course.
Kind of, now in the grand scheme of things, is a little bit true because
Little
it
bit.
could be any tampon. We know
Yeah.
that. But, this was the one coming up all the time. So it's just like, show us the receipts.
Yeah.
So
I mean, if it's the one that is coming up all the time, then
someone's going to look into it.
yeah.
This was also at a time too where I feel like the public didn't have as much distrust to a corporation as it does now.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
It was sort of like, if it's for sale, then it's safe.
It's safe,
And now we don't trust a lot of things. So
yeah, things are very different now.
they're very different now. Also, like, back in the day, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, was created to protect the consumer. And now it functions actually quite a bit more as a customer to the company.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's totally different
Yeah.
now.
This is back when the FDA was still doing good things. So anyway, so Procter & Gamble starts having their lawyers go after complainants who had TSS and had recovered. Because they wanted the complete medical records of these people so that they could refute the claims. That is privileged information between doctor and patient. All of these patients who were in the recorded, I guess, kind of study, they were supposed to be anonymous. P&G doesn't care. They even had a couple lawyers swindle a Kmart manager into divulging the information of 2 local complainants in Indiana.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, they got down and dirty.
Real down and dirty.
Yeah. So in September of 1980, though, Rely was recalled and discontinued, and they fought it for a while. Actually, not even that long, because this whole thing only took 2 years.
Yeah.
But the FDA stepped in and they threatened really serious legal action. So technically Rely pulled it off of their own accord.
Okay.
But at that time they had already lost a wrongful death suit, possibly more than one. I know of one specifically.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of other suits that were pending. There were class actions pending.
Sure.
They were losing a lot of money on the product because now the public knows, and there's articles being written about killer tampons.
Oh my gosh,
And so, they recalled. And then, cases of TSS nosedived after the Rely tampon had been recalled.
Yeah.
So the tampon scandal did instigate a decent amount of change in the menstrual hygiene industry. So it wasn't for nothing, but now all menstrual products are, all internal menstrual products, I should say, are medical devices, no exception. And then it also kind of clarified for corporations, scientists, politicians, and the public that just because a product isn't poisonous on its own, like I said, doesn't mean that it's not going to remain inert and casual once inserted in the body.
Totally.
Those are not always going to happen that way.
No.
So very shortly after Rely was discontinued, it was discovered, and I mean 3 years after, very shortly, it was discovered that it wasn't a brand exclusive disease.
Yeah. Exactly.
TSS did not discriminate.
Nope.
And it was determined that all internal absorbent products have the potential to incite toxic shock, and that's how the warning ended up on all tampon boxes.
Okay, interesting.
Because even though the number in the States, and I think in Canada as well, had really plummeted, they were still there.
Exactly.
And so, and it might have just been because of those absorbent wars.
Yeah.
So, and that's also why, in addition to the warning of may cause death, it says you should choose the lowest absorbent tampon.
Yeah.
They don't say why.
No, they
You
don't.
have to do your own research in that.
You do, yeah.
So that was the
But I'm also why make super tampons? The thing is that you're not supposed to use them.
I know.
So why make them?
Contemporary, I don't know. No. Back in the day, can you imagine having fibroids in 1978?
Totally, yeah.
What do you do?
What do you do?
I don't even know.
Exactly.
So,
and I, and I think this is partly why I think like inventions and progression in menstrual hygiene is so necessary
But it's so
for
rare.
the reason of making the product better. Do you know what I mean? Like
Yes.
not to just gobble
Improve.
up as much market share as you can get,
Yeah.
but to actually like investigate what the menstruator needs, like what is going on, how does it need to function, and how can we improve it?
How can you make a better product that doesn't just mean how can you sell more product,
Yeah.
but rather like how can you make this a better experience for someone who's
Yeah.
probably going to need to buy your product every month regardless?
Yeah,
Like why
Pretty
not
much.
just do better?
just do better. Yeah, exactly. Like but the thing is, it's most likely because the people making it were non-menstruators. They were most
Oh, yeah.
likely men, older men.
100%.
You know, like they didn't need to use the product. They didn't know how the product, needed to function. So I'm not surprised that those kind of things happen.
I'm not surprised either. And, we know like some pretty good changes have been made,
Yeah,
but I
for
still
sure.
don't really think it's enough. And I don't think that people fucking talk about this
I
enough.
don't think they do. And the thing is, like, when I was doing my research, like, there's been, like, spikes in TSS multiple times. In 1999, there was another, I didn't really go into what brand it was, but there was another brand that just made super high absorbency tampons with, I think it was just rayon or whatever. Sudden spike for 3 years of TSS cases,
Was that discontinued, that product? Do you know?
It didn't even say. Like I'm sure it was. I would assume, or they changed.
Or
how
they
were
changed the
doing
composition?
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of like, if we don't talk about it, if we don't think it's something that is risky, who's to say they're not going to do it again? Who's
Yeah.
to say that it's not going to become a thing again? And something that I thought was interesting was which I still think is a safer, much, much safer choice, but there has been now at least a couple of documented cases of menstrual cups
Yeah.
leading to TSS.
Yeah. And I think that's the lesion thing. If I had to gamble, I would say that's that.
In the cases that I read, they
Yeah.
were lesions. So, menstrual cups can be a little bit difficult to get in.
You got to get more up in there with your fingers
exactly.
too.
So
Yeah.
you're bringing more bacteria in.
Or if you've got long nails.
Precisely. So, their internal products are not perfect. There were some really rare cases of like synthetic pads, like your really, really cheap synthetic pads, like on very rare occasions causing TSS.
I feel like if that were the case, you'd have to be wearing a very like questionable pad, but also for a very long time.
Very long time, and you would probably have to have some tears, maybe like around your vulva,
Right, yeah,
or like,
yeah.
which can happen. Like you can get micro tears from,
Or you could have already had an
intercourse,
infection of some kind.
or you could have had an infection. But yeah, I think basically like there is still, in my opinion, there's still too much of a risk using tampons. I don't think that they should be used. I just don't think that it's worth the risk. I think menstrual cups, I think you just have to be safe and careful when you're using it, just like anything when you're putting it inside of you. But yeah, I just think I don't know. I just have such a hard time with this topic.
It's a scary thing. It's really
so
scary. And yeah.
It's so scary, and I think it's just devastating. Like the amount of people that have died just even recently.
Yeah.
And they're so young.
They're so young.
So
Yeah.
young. And I hope people out there maybe try other products.
Try their products, but also,
Listen to our period products episode about the other products.
And also just like, get to know your body, be aware if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right.
Very true. Trust your gut.
Read the box.
Definitely read the box.
Stay safe out there.
And I don't know.
Just stay safe.
Just stay safe.
Yeah.
Just do it. It's all we request of you.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Why So Mysterious is hosted by Sara Jonsdottir and Raven McLean. Audio is produced and edited by Sonia Inke. Original music is by Malcolm Holt and Alexis Young.
Check out our website, whysomysterious.com, for more information about this episode and other episodes. You can also email us with questions or topics you'd like to hear us cover on the show at whysomysteriousPod@gmail.com.
Follow us on Instagram at whysomysteriousPod for updates, fun facts, and general outrage. If you're an audio listener, but you'd rather be a voyeur, check us out on YouTube.
If you like the show, tell your friends, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Until next time!